Go live. Good day, beautiful, bountiful, beloved, immortal beings, and good-looking people. Remember, you're good-looking because you're always looking for finding the good. Barry Shore, the ambassador of joy, your humble moderator for this remarkable collection of fabulous people with insights into the benefits for you about marriage. And I will begin by mentioning the date today. We don't usually do that, but today is Thursday, May 26th, the year 2022.
Why is that working?
And it's a solemn time. It's a solemn time because less than 48 hours ago, there was a tremendous tragedy in the United States of America. Now, we have people watching from all over the world, but the world is so small today because of social media that everybody knows what happened. It is horrid, inexcusable, terrible, and hopefully brings together people from disparate parts of the political spectrum to try and find some positive results and maybe even some capable situations to begin to protect our students. I don't mean just protecting them from with walls and barbed wire and people on campus with guns and such, but begin to protect them truly by beginning to reinvigorate values and such. Because of COVID, the response to COVID was a nationwide lockdown. It wasn't COVID that caused the difficulty, it was the lockdown. The lockdown created enormous pressures on people that were, how should we say it, exacerbated any kind of difficulty that people had in their families, in their personal lives. And I think we all know, well, if we don't, we should know that the suicide rate, especially amongst teenagers, has increased 10, 20, 30% in some cases. And mostly among girls, interestingly enough. Girls are more susceptible oftentimes than boys anyway. But boys act out in a different way. Hello, what we're seeing, tragedy. Now you combine that with a toxic environment of having the ability to gain access to firearms in a relatively easy way. It spells disaster. And that's what we have today. So I don't want to be completely sullen, but we should be solemn, and we can still be nice and joyful and happy and such. But we want to address in today's webinar, and maybe even again next week, because it's such a powerful topic and so timely, whose kids are they anyway? When it comes to the education of our children, and we're talking now education, not just in the information process, or whether it's called STEM or the 3 R's, but we're talking about the true education and raising of children to become adults, but responsible, capable, giving, generous, community-oriented adults. And that takes a lot of work, a lot more work than we previously thought. As we saw, again, I think the lockdowns contributed tremendously to the breakdown that was already happening. And Maura and I discussed it just before we went live about the deterioration in language. We might even talk about that as well. But suffice it to say that I have literally in the past 48 hours, an additional 193 questions that were sent in addition to about 140 that we had before. So I'm just inundated, and they're all over the board. I mean, they all obviously talk about the same idea of whose kids are they. And I'm going to try and see if I can pull together some threads of a question or two or three so that our remarkable panel, our wonderful Dr. Diane Medved holding up the fort in the great Northwest, and our ambassador of happiness holding up the fort in the great Southeast, and our wonderful life expert holding up the fort in the great Southwest, and then me in the desert, where we are in triple digits regularly now. We turn the corner. It's springtime, but it's wonderful. It breeze and such. You imagine 101 degrees, but it's not humid, and you get a breeze, and it's just. Plus, I'm in the pool a lot, so it's a nice tan. and just keeping it up. Okay, so we're just going to jump right in as we do. And again, the idea of what we're talking about is whose kids are they anyway? And I think I can pose the question of this. And again, I'm telling you a question that came in from, uh, I'd say 45, 50 people. And I'm telling you the words that a lot of people used. Ready? And then I'm trying to form it as a question. The statement is, it seems like they're coming for our kids, end quote. In other words, I don't know, I assume who the they is or are, but there seems to be a feeling that there's a concerted effort. I don't want to call it conspiracy, but concerted effort for an ideology, a group of people coming for our kids. Again, I'm leaving it up to each one of you to address it, but that's the question on the table. Is there a they are coming for our kids happening? And I'll even define it. Kids from, let's say, K through 12. That's sort of the easiest way to define it, because that's where the formulation of the most, how should we say it, the value system, the language, the process of integrating with family and other people really begins to take hold on the stages of the adult. So as is our wont, we will begin in the great Northwest with our amazing, wonderful Dr. Diane Medved. Wonderful Diane, would you please address this, again, to me, very interesting comment, scary a bit. They're coming for our kids. Does that sound right?
Well, as a psychologist, of course, I look at the individual and I see that as an expression of lack of personal control. They're coming for our kids. That means I don't have any control over my children. They is some impersonal negative force that is pervasive, I think. I mean, it's hard to generalize what that might be, but what it says to me is about the speaker. And the speaker is feeling lack of control. And it doesn't feel that the education of the children, perhaps, or the values taught the children, or the parenting approach. It used to be okay to spank your kids. Now it's not. Now it's definitively not okay to spank your kids. What I see my children doing when their kids do something that is totally disobedient is they get face to face and they say, I know you're having feelings. Okay, I know they are having feelings, and it's great to acknowledge feelings and important to do so and not to just spank. However, there are times when the word obedience should be applied, and it's not popular. In fact, the word obedience is distinctly unpopular now, to the point where parents who use that term can be seen as abusive. And I find that distressing. I also want to mention that the lack of control that an individual feels is a result of a generalized lack of unity of values. And I know Hillary Clinton wrote a book that says it takes a village, that everyone disparaged because the idea of, well, no, parents raise their kids, it's not the village. But you can't underestimate the importance of a milieu that supports your values. And in our day, when we were children, the school could be counted upon to echo the parents' values. Now, no one dares assume what another's values are, thereby creating a vacuum. And in that vacuum come all kinds of values, many of which are free range. The child should be able to determine the values, or the child should be able to determine how they spend their time and what they do. That is to the detriment of teaching the child discipline, and particularly self-discipline. And I think that these tragedies, which have hurt me, when I heard the news, I literally cried about Uvalde and how so many people were affected, and how the community, and then we're getting all these other details that show that there's an assumption that things would always be okay. And now in our culture, there has to be an assumption to prepare for the worst. This is really difficult, and it's a pressure on children. And one of the things I hope that we'll be able to talk about, besides they're coming for our kids, is how do you deal with a culture that does this to you, does this to you as a parent, does this to you as a child and as an educator? How do you cope with this kind of thing? And specifically, how do you cope with this kind of tragedy that is not just located in Texas, but it shakes the foundations of security for children everywhere and parents as well? And I wrote a book with my husband called Saving Childhood, Protecting Our Children from the National Assault on Innocence. And there's very little that assaults innocence anymore than a lack of security, feeling secure, feeling that your place is inviolate and your role as a parent is inviolate. And I think that we have to discuss how to build these back and how to survive through such a large stress that's not only happening to our culture, but happening to our own families and even ourselves.
I just want to, I'm going to talk about a number of things that you raised because they're wonderful points. And that's really the purpose of this webinar, isn't it? Is to begin to discuss these issues and find potential pathways, because it is, in my humble opinion, the marriage, the family, the marriage that is the bedrock of creating security in both your physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. And there's a number of other things I want to discuss that you mentioned, Diane, but just want to put that on the front burner, that stress is that place where the marriage becomes better for it or doesn't, has cracks, and then but you can repair them. That's the genius of it. That, again, we're here as a webinar to talk to thousands of people who are sending you messages, as I'm saying, hello, okay, let's go to Maura. In the same vein, that same question, it seems, according to a lot of people who are sending in questions, they are coming for our kids. How do you see this?
Yeah, what a powerful in-your-face statement to make. But isn't that kind of what we're looking at right now? That has become somewhat of the fear that's now pervasive as a result of all these things that have taken place. Diane, your comments were excellent, and they prompted several of mine. Here's what I was getting. We have been undergoing a shift, a cultural, and I would say a policy shift over the course of time that went from family into institutions and government, meaning that the family was the bedrock of our society. The families from these small, I'd say, pods would become the foundation of children, growth, communities, etc. And now we have shifted. And this has been over several decades, because I remember even 30 years ago, I was working with a nonprofit. And I remember reading white papers even back then, and there were some people that were concerned about what was taking place in school, because schooling used to be, can you read, can you write, could you do math, could you figure out science? And they were moving to things like values clarification. And we've come way down the pike since then. So what's happened here, and this goes back to they're coming for our children, somewhere along the pathway, I think it's oftentimes when we're not alert, when we're very busy, when we are starting to move from an active into a passive or default position, we forget that we are the nucleus of our family. We are the centerpiece of influence for our family, our home, our children. And what's happened is many parents in the process have yielded their parental identities, responsibilities, awareness, and let's say their roles as adults and guardians over their children. They have slowly yielded it to institutional type environments for people with maybe PhDs or big titles within national organizations seem to know better than we do. Now, maybe in some cases they do, but don't we as parents owe ourselves and our own family the opportunity of self-reflection to say, okay, how do I feel about these new policies? Am I aligned with them? Do I agree with them? And oftentimes we don't do it. So if I could almost flip this on its head, can I actually suggest, as I have with several other things, that sometimes we have tragedies in life that wake us up and move us toward better places. So things maybe that we're moving in a harmful fashion end up shocking us to a point where we say, wait a minute, what's my responsibility here? Let me wake up from my own slumber and decide I'm playing an active role. And Diane, was it you who mentioned that we are, let me see, that we were an echo rather than driving our values? Did you mention that? Because I wrote it down. I don't know if you said it or
Not just
sound like you. Okay. And I think that's something, and this has shocked me. I always used to believe that when people got older and they graduated from school and they became full size, full stature, that they not only were intelligent, but they were wise to life. And I realize that's not necessarily the case, especially because we're so often taking in things from the culture that are negative, that go contrary to, I would say, healthy values, promoting healthy values for life, for family, for the future, for safety, for security, for goodness and virtue. And that we have essentially moved from being active participants to echoing without even being aware of it, everything we've heard without looking at it, assessing it, analyzing, and deciding whether or not that's how we feel. So my answer is very much like yours would be, are they coming for the kids, or am I just not paying attention? Am I going to reclaim my role as a parent and take an active, engaged part in the process?
Yeah, the R word, responsibility. I just want to, before we introduce Lori, to ask her to speak. I think it was Lori last week or the week before, where she told over a situation. I think it was her daughter at school, and her daughter came home spouting forth certain ideas and such that were just completely off base from what the family had been teaching and such. And Lori was shocked at saying, my gosh, the school doesn't echo our values. It's a different place. And we all felt safe sending our kids off to school with their backpacks and their food and go and enjoy. And I'm sure everybody's going to be just like I am, and my mother and father, and taking care and teaching joy, happiness, peace, and love. And guess what? So as that as an introduction from the wife expert, Lori, what do you think about this comment, they're coming for our kids?
I've said that before, and I've had people say that in my area. One of the things I just kind of want to mention, my husband was on a business trip for a week and he didn't know any of this. And last night I picked him up at the airport, and on the way back to the house, he was complaining about a few things. And then we pulled in, and I just so much going on, and plus everything that happened down there. It was just, my mind. And by the time we got in the house, he was complaining about something else. And then he was complaining about something else. And I let those things go off my shoulders. He sits down to watch TV, and it got really quiet. And I just let him be, and I had things to do. And when he was getting ready to go to bed, he came over to me practically sobbing, and he gave me a hug. And he goes, I didn't know this was happening in our world. I just haven't turned on the TV. And I just thought, just shifted, right? Taking that moment and being aware of what could happen. He said, I'm just grateful that didn't happen to us. And that's kind of where we need to start. So as far as family goes, on that note you just said, Barry, my son is now taking tutoring at his school. They're offering private tutoring. And he's been with this company called Air Tutors, and he's learning English. And I've only scheduled him for the last few weeks because we got behind. And I just wanted him up on his English. So the teacher decided to have the kids watch TED Talks. And they watched TED Talks, and then she asked them questions about it. And my fee for this was $125 to watch 3 TED Talks. One of the TED Talks was about Hillary Clinton and how wonderful she was and how pro-women we are. And, yeah. And I asked my son, I go, what'd you think of that? He goes, it was weird. That she's like trying to influence me, and that's not what I believe. And so when you say they're coming to get you, let me be on my guard. You cannot let your guard down. And just a side note about the gun issue, there's a few groups in my area that are getting these coalitions together to fight for gun safety. And I was right next to a police officer in the next lane because I have a habit of talking to strangers. And I tooted my horn and he looked at me and I rolled my window down and I go, hey, I go, thanks for your service. Do we have a gun problem in California or are we pretty good at doing background checks? And he goes, we are the strictest state in the country, except for New York. They're strict too. He goes, you cannot get a gun in the state of California. It takes 10 days, blah, 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 blah. He goes, nothing's happening. He goes, but there's a lot of shootings here because if you want to get a gun, you will figure it out. So I was really aware of hearing that. And I don't personally want to own a gun because, you know, things go wrong. And if you have a gun, maybe you'll shoot someone. I don't know. I don't want a gun in my house. But I'm really, I feel like there's this pressure of be careful, just, you know, watch what happens to your kids. When I didn't have that before, you know, we just went to school and we believed our kids and we believed our people that are leading. The teachers, we have a student body like parent council. Do you know 3 people on the school board at my kid's school aren't even parents? And that is our fault because we weren't paying attention and these people just got in and are making crazy, and 2 of them are gay. Not that that matters, but there's all this influence that isn't representative of the student body. And it's just scary. So yeah, so they're coming for us really just makes me feel like you have to be on your guard. I have to defend my family because no one else is going to do that. They used to. That time is gone for now. Maybe we'll go back.
Mama Bear speaks. Lori, you want to say something?
I
No,
did.
oh,
Oh, were you saying Maura?
no,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. I want to just jump off that last statement that Lori made. The mama bears. Just earlier this week, I was out, or maybe it was last weekend. I was grocery shopping, Aldi's. It's a good store. It's great cheese. It's great everything. They're also known for low prices, and more and more people have been going there for their groceries. I, like Lori, I will talk to every perfect stranger. I love to get other people's perspectives. And I'm looking at eggs that used to be 88 cents a dozen that are now $2.49.
What?
And yes, like within a matter of months. So, you know, they're far more at our local Publix, but the point being that prices of food is going up. So I look for somebody to just make a statement to, and I want to know what they think. And I happened to say to a woman that was opening the same area, I said, you know, have you noticed the price of food skyrocketing? And I said, you know what? I really feel for these families with young growing children. So she said to me, I didn't realize this. She said to me, well, I'm one of them. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, I've got a set of 12-year-olds, twins, boy and girl. And she said, so I am busy, you know, making sure that I can feed the family properly. And she told me this one story. Talk about a mama bear. She said, I made a decision along with my husband. She said, I was going to go back to work after COVID. And I mentioned this to my husband, and my husband said, we will make it work. You are not going back. You're not sending the kids back to school. That was the big thing. She's been homeschooling the kids, and now she's doing it again, but she's continuing it. And here she is shopping. And this was some interesting thing. So again, the mama bear, something had shifted in this family where they're thinking and this is before a few days ago when we heard the most recent thing about the shooting. She said, you know what? My kids are at home. I am teaching them academically, but she said they're in a family environment. She said, now, financially, we have a lot less because we don't have my income. But she said, you know what I realized? Not only are we going to make it, but she said, I also realized how many things did we used to spend money on that we really didn't need. And she said, now I decide, you know, our priorities. And it reminded me of something that happened years ago before we had the whole feminist movement. Now, I had a career. I was out all the time before I had my daughter. And I managed to kind of do 2 things while I was homeschooling my daughter and working part-time with my husband. But there was a time when women managed the home, watched over the kids, provided a safe space, and they don't even use this. Where did I go?
We can see you. We can hear you.
They were home economists. And I'm looking at this mom and I'm thinking, you're like a throwback, but you're a brand new one. She's becoming a new home economist, figuring out what is our income, how do we stretch it, what do we do, how do we make the best of where we are. And the other thing is, I'm glad you could still hear me. What I realized is that she's going to end up with more resilient children because together they're figuring out in this new environment, how can they make the best of life and family life? How can they grow? And it's almost like working through a challenge, but bringing the family closer together in the process. So there's an example of Mama Bear, and I'm going to even say Papa Bear.
So this is wonderful. I want, first of all, each one of you are bringing tremendous insights here. I wrote down a number of things. I just want to go back to one line that, actually one word that Lori used, and she used it subconsciously, but I think she meant it exactly like this. Remember, she talked about her son having a tutor. And you remember what you said, Lori? You say, because we fell behind in English or in reading or something. She didn't say, my son fell behind. We fell behind. That process of not just thinking of speaking it and doing is because that's what we're all talking about here. This ability to have responsibility, to be involved. I love what you said, Diane, about the O word, obedience, and how to even bring it in today's world without being accused of being abusive. By the way, not simple, because a kid could go to school and say, you know, my father hit me, just like that, talking. Somebody's listening. And I don't want to tell you stories that I read about using wrong pronouns, let alone people, you know, spanking their kids once every 16 years. I'm not exaggerating. I did it for my son once in 16 years, and he still remembers it. Which is good, actually. But it's an interesting dilemma. So I love that you said we got behind. But each one of you used an interesting word I also want to talk about. That's the word called shift. Now, when I do my podcast, I talk about shift perspective. I found that many people, unfortunately, drop the F in shift, and the other stuff happens. And you have to be very, very careful to understand that shift does happen. Sometimes you wake up because of what we'll call tragedy, and sometimes because of events, let's say inflation and deterioration of language and society and such. But the ability to have responsibility for ourselves, as Diane said so eloquently, it starts with us. I take responsibility. I share that with my spouse, my significant other, and now I am able to project that to our children and grandchildren. The R word is absolutely fundamental to becoming adult, I think. Personal responsibility is a foundation, a bedrock, and that's what keeps a marriage flowing and a family growing when you can do these kinds of things, because otherwise the stresses of society, and as you said so nicely, Diane, shaking the foundation of security. Great line. Shaking the foundation of security, because that's really what it's about, isn't it? That you could even think that I send my kids off to school in the morning and they don't come back. Hello? This is the United States of America. This is not Ukraine in 2022. There's a war going on. And it's not other places in the world. My dearest friend and colleague who's been taking care of me for 17 years comes from Uganda. He just came back from holiday, being away for a number of weeks. So first of all, it was more difficult without him here. But when he comes back, I always query him, what's it like? He said, Mr. Shore, like I told you, it's Africa. What do you want? Uganda. I mean, this is how things work over there. It's graft, it's corruption, it's what, sounds like America sometimes, but it's not. It's on a different scale. There is no security there. We don't live there. We live in the United States. It's not supposed to be this way, right? Okay, but I'm going to, I just noticed I have all these questions written down here that people sent in. And I think there's a great segue here because we're talking about something about what you mentioned, Laura. Sorry about that. About the woman homeschooling now. So I just read a data point, and then I'm going to talk it out and then tell you about the question we have. I've got a bunch of questions. But the data point is the following. I just saw this in one of these newsletters I get. LAUSD, which I believe is either first or second in the country in terms of numbers of students, in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands. They're expecting a 30% drop in K through 12 students over the next decade. We're not talking about 3%, 6%, 10%, 12, 15. They're expecting a 30% drop. And if they expect a 30% drop, it may be even more. But let's be blunt, 30% is not a small number because the government pays per student a large amount of money. I think it's in excess of $12,000 or $14,000. And that funds not just teachers, but administrators. The level of bureaucracy these days in schools is nauseating because it causes more difficulty than it does in resolving things. Again, personal input. So that was just one data point. But I have a number of pieces here that I think I'll speak about, if not today, then next week, because we're going to continue this. And the question that's coming up is, you ready? Should I take my kids out of public school? And by the way, a lot of questions, I'm talking about 67 questions. A lot of the questions were, should I take my kids out of private school? Because in some cases, private school may be no better than public schools. People are more and more thinking about homeschooling. And there's a wonderful woman that I heard just recently on a talk show. Sorry, I don't remember her name, but she has an organization. She's a former teacher. She started an organization called thinkexodus.org, thinkexodus.org, and it's fully accredited. Hear this? Fully accredited program for enabling families to be able to teach their children at home. Course material, everything online. They charge for it, very minimal amount of money. But the point is, he's a former teacher who says, I can't do this anymore. Excuse the expression, her younger colleagues, I think she's in her 40s, late 40s, her younger colleagues in late 20s, early 30s, she says they are what we call in the fun world, true believers. And if you know anything about that kind of world of true believers, there's nothing you can say. They are on a mission to make the world in their image, and they've been radicalized. Again, these are her words, not mine. But because I know some remarkably wonderful, gifted teachers in both the public school and the private school system. But so the question really is, as people are asking, should I take my kids out of public school and teach them at home? Diane, I mean, you're an advocate on both sides, actually.
Actually, you're right. Because I did get my teaching credentials. I've taught not for very long in public schools in every level. I got my counseling credentials, and I did that in an inner city all black school. And I've seen a lot of kids who have graduated from public schools, private schools. We homeschooled our kids for a time and also used private and public schools. So there's not one answer to that. One of the big factors for most families is finances. You don't have a choice to put your child in a private school unless you can get a scholarship or something, unless you have the funds to pay for it. And so most people choose public schools because of that. Also, homeschooling is not nothing. It's not where you take a curriculum from some other organization and think you can just apply it. Homeschooling is total dedication. It's preparation. It's planning out. It's a full-time job. It's not something that you can combine with a whole bunch of other things in your life. No, your children's education can't be put aside. It can't be, oh, well, we won't do it today. It has to be a continuity, and it goes from beginning to end. So there are complications in every answer to that question. Should I take my child out of private school? Should I take my child out of public school? There are benefits to both. And I think it depends on, A, your priorities. I know many people who have chosen to move to places where the public schools are well rated, even if there were not a lot of other resources there that they would have liked, but they made that the highest priority. So they moved to a place with good public schools. And I would say that in every place, there are dedicated public school teachers. I'll also mention my mother-in-law, Renata Medved, who was a biologist by profession. In later life, decided to go back and become a teacher. She taught in the inner city barrio in Los Angeles. There was nobody more dedicated than she. She barely knew Spanish. She had to pick it up, even though all her students only spoke Spanish. She would come to school and bring them clothing, bring them food. She would bring them pencils and learning materials. There's no one more dedicated than my mother-in-law when she taught in a public school. So what I have to say to every parent is you have many different important things in your life. What priority do you place your children's education? And if you put it at the very top, then you might want to say, all right, we need to live in a place that has a good public school. Or you might want to say, okay, we're not going to have a vacation this year. We're going to put that money to our children's private school education. There's also an issue of values. We happen to be Jewish, and it was very important to us for our children to get a Jewish education. So we, at some points in there, we had homeschooling. For another situation, we put our kids in the public school and arranged for them to allow them to leave school for half a day and come home for Jewish tutoring. We had to pay for the tutors, but you can craft different ways to meet your needs. And so that question is a trick question. There's no one.
Right. There's no question. It's a trick question. But,
and as you said,
you're answering beautifully.
I'm an advocate for all of the above. The answer is yes, yes, yes. Every one of the options has positives to it. And if your child isn't getting his or her needs met, then that's the key. You need to know your child, know what your child needs, know where your child excels. We had one child who needed to be with a lot of people because she was very social. And in her Jewish private school, there was only 7 kids in her grade. Well, we ended up taking her out of the private school and putting her in the public school where she thrived. Her Jewish education suffered a little bit, but we had to know our child. So you start, first of all, with your values, your children, and then you work out from there what's available, what can we afford, what are the priorities in the kind of place where we put this particular child. You may end up with children of similar ages in different schools. You have to decide if that's practical for you, if that works for you. So what I recommend is make a list. What are the priorities? What are the considerations? What are the pros and the cons of each of the options? And then weigh it out. Put it on paper. Don't just try and say, oh my, this is an overwhelming choice. Put on paper, what are the options? What are the characteristics of this child? What are my priorities? And then mesh it together with your partner, because this is a 2-person decision. It's a marital decision, not just a mom decision or a dad decision. Make sure that both of you are in concert over the decision that you make, and then keep paying attention to how your child is doing. Don't think the decision is made once you put the kid in school. Keep evaluating. Keep checking in with the child every day when they come home from school. What are they saying about it? What are they saying about their friends? What are they saying about their choices of how to spend their free time? Think about all that. And it's an ongoing process. I always say making the childbearing decision is not a decision. It's a decision that changes with every moment as that child grows, as different things come up, as there are different needs of the family. It's shifting all the time. It's probably the most challenging thing that you'll ever take on, and it's never over.
And there's that shift word again. And the R word, responsibility. So first of all, thank you very much, Diane. Articulate and insightful. I will have to say, because I knew her, Diane's mother-in-law, a quite remarkable woman. Truly hard to describe how interesting and fascinating she is still in her because her presence is still felt through her sons and such. I will also say that was somewhat of a different era. You know, it was a good 40 plus years ago, 50 maybe.
30.
Yeah. So, but still in all, these same remarkable beings still exist in the system. the larger system, whether it be private or public. And I just want to make mention that I think Diane is saying something like this. There's a difference between being interested in homeschooling, as it were, as opposed to commitment. In other words, once if you and your partner decide this is no longer just, gee, this is interesting. No, it's commitment. So therefore, you do need to prepare, as she says, put it on paper, not on the computer. Okay, you want to do a spreadsheet later, fine. But use pencil and paper, pen and paper, and look at it, write it out.
Mhm.
Who are the kids? You're right. Listen to what she said. Each one may be different. This one is a public school. Maybe no, this one's private. This one goes here. Okay, that's part of the genius of being a parent, a responsible, awake parent. So thank you so much. That was, I appreciate it. Okay, wonderful, Maura. Trying to remember the question. Yeah.
And I always bring you back to the audience.
The question is, should I take my kids out of school? Let's put it that way.
All right, that's a
By
good
the
one.
way, and I do want to say again, we want to be cognizant of the tragic events of just 2 days ago in the United States with the mass murder of 21 people, 19 of them children. People are actually scared about sending kids to school. In other words, that's part of the equation today. It's not just finances. Isn't that amazing? Was finances before? It was my child, who is, or she, or he, etc. But now it's, wait a minute, do I even want to be having my child in an open environment like that? I mean, these are not small issues anymore. It is truly a bit much. Okay, yes, Laura. So keep kids in, keep them out. What do you want to do?
You know, I mentioned I was a homeschooling parent. I was so opposed to, we had one child who was a little girl, and I'm thinking, an only child homeschooled, this is awful. And this would have been 20 something years ago when homeschooling was, brand new. However, I will tell you this, I would agree. Even though I became a homeschooling parent, I know as a child, I would not have done well, I don't think, homeschooled, because I need to be around the world. Our daughter was thriving in it. And my answer to anyone who is me when here I'm a homeschooling parent, they're either thinking I'm totally homeschooling or anti-public school or whatever. And the fact is, I am neither. And I've always been of this persuasion. And here's what I would say: what works best for your child? And also, you are the parent. There are some parents and moms and dads too that absolutely embrace the concept of homeschooling. They're fully engaged. Even my husband 1 year took the reins and he was homeschooling our daughter. There are other moms that I've met. They may be reactive, let's say. They want to move their children out of the world, but they're not personally engaged, activated, mature enough in their own realm to take on that as an additional responsibility. And let's say the discipline of every day sitting down with their children. So that's something that's got to be considered. Also, every year is different. I've seen some moms and they come to me and say, Maura, what do you think? And I would always say, well, if this is something you think you'd like to do, why not try it? And never is there a decision that we make that we cannot change in another year. I will tell you, in my case, I was a homeschooling mom, but I also worked with an umbrella organization. So I had all that I needed in terms of the structure, the grading, etc. But and I also got myself tested every year to say, what do you think I'm doing with my daughter after I got my daughter tested? So it was an ongoing type thing. And I would say it really does depend on those individual circumstances. But I want to add some additional outgrowth to this in terms of family life, because there are many decisions that come from this. I have noted a number of families where the parents have decided we're going to homeschool, the mom's going to stay home. So sometimes that means, are we going to move to a home that doesn't carry the same major mortgage? So therefore, we might be in a small environment, but we're now living within our means rather than we're no longer a 2-income family, we're a 1-income family. we lost that somewhere along the way, especially when we had the millennial kids. It was like, we had 1.5 kids and we were living in 5,000 square feet. I don't know why, but we were, right? Think about it. Now we're looking at the opposite. So that's a consideration, living within our means. And there are many things that go along with this. I want to say one other thing. Barry, you mentioned that there's about a 30% drop in LA school system, correct, right? They're anticipating with fewer children being enrolled. But I've noticed here in Florida, a number of teachers older as well as just starting out that are getting out of teaching. And I find it so sad. Teachers themselves have confided into me off the record that their desire and their love for teaching, especially in the public school system, and I would say to a certain degree in private school systems, it depends on the environment, has become so institutionalized, so codified, that the concept of being a teacher with a class and having living learning, where you're actually engaging with these children and getting them to the point where they love to learn, has been so squelched out of them. I volunteered in schools, especially in high-risk areas, and what I found, as you said earlier, Barry, they've got all these experts, all these ancillary individuals that come in, hoping to help the kids out, and these young children don't have 5 minutes themselves. They don't play on the school grounds. They can't even have lunch without having someone tutor them, and the net effect is all of these people, all of these tax dollars, and these young children are getting lost in the mix. So what do I say? Go back to your own priorities. What's important? What do you have within your environment that can help impact and affect some of the changes you're hoping to make? And I want to offer one more thing. I don't know this about other states, but here in Florida, they have had fundamental schools. They've been around for maybe over 20 years, and they're public schools. You have to get on a list and your child gets in, but is always required both parents' involvement. The parents have to sign all the homework. They come in once a month for meetings. And unless you're willing to be engaged, you cannot have your child in the school. So that's another thing. And I think we're at a point right now, even with homeschooling, that people, unlike years ago, even though public schools might be very institutionalized, we have access to a lot of options today, especially if we open ourselves to them, that we did not have access to years ago. You just have to be a little creative, decide what your priorities are, and work around it. And then continue.
This is really good because, yes, to get out of the sort of a dark picture, thank God there are so many more opportunities in today's environment for education, for schooling, for values, for even meeting people of similar values, which is, again, a foundational part of marriage, friendships, both for parents and for children, to be in the similar environment. But there's so many more opportunities to do this, certainly online even. And Diane, just as a point of interest, so when we were growing, myself, I'm the oldest in the family and two sisters. So we moved from, we were very happy in a particular place in Boston, Massachusetts, to Brookline, Massachusetts, simply because better school system. We sold our house and moved into an apartment. It was a better school system. Just as a data point. I'm going to say something that will shock all of you and the thousands of people watching. I have never lived in a house with central air conditioning until last year.
Wow.
And I'm 73. We moved to Henderson. First of all, you need it, obviously. But in growing up Massachusetts, in Brookline, I didn't have it just because we didn't have it. It was a different time. We had an air conditioner in one of the rooms of the house at some point because it was just too hot. And in Venice, we didn't have air conditioning, Diane. You didn't either, probably. No, you didn't need it really. I mean, a few times. Right. But, so until I was 72, I didn't have central air conditioning. So let's move to wonderful. By the way, just as another data point, again, I have all these pieces that were given to me and I've been researching and such. And this is not just LAUSD. This is the headline. U.S. schools face mass exodus of teachers in the coming year. I mean, we're not talking about 500. We're talking about thousands of teachers who are exiting teaching as a profession from the public schools mostly, some private schools, but to take jobs in the private sector because they have great skills, and to go uh, into the teaching profession, helping people with homeschooling and such like that. Because it does take a lot. Again, there's a difference between being interested in something and being committed to something. So talking about being a committed being, wonderful Lori. What's our question again? Our question is, what's our question?
Shall I
Should
take?
Oh, should I take my kids out of school?
Yeah, I love that. I love that question. Years ago, I wanted to homeschool my kids on a bus and take them across the country. I thought that would have been the best experience ever. But then, I mean, I hope this isn't a negative thing, but I really thought about homeschooling. And if there was ever a school shooting in my school, one of us would go to jail. So I was always worried that something would go wrong. And I didn't want to be the problem for my kids if something wasn't learned. But I was very jealous of all the moms in my neighborhood who were, signing up with this homeschooling and this homeschooling. And then, on Tuesdays they'd meet at this house because this lady taught religion. And on this day they meet at this house because this lady did English. So they kind of formed their own little school that would move around and they'd have lunch over here. And so the kids weren't all one age. They were younger and older and they all kind of had to work with each other. And I was jealous. I didn't have the gut because I would have had to teach something. And back then, I just wasn't organized enough to be a teacher. So I kind of liked my kids going off and, trusting the school system, which I now know kind of let me down. Perfect example, my son goes to college, right? There are books this thick that he has to buy. The book this thick costs like $400, this thick. It's like, when was it written? Like 1920? Like, and it's this thick and it costs $200? Like, that to me is just baffling because everything keeps changing. Yes, reading, writing, math, all those things are basic. And when they're little, it's pretty easy. But when you get to 6th, 7th, 8th, freshman, it gets complicated. And you as a teacher have to know that information. And I wasn't interested in learning. One of the things my daughter kind of came into recently in a classroom, she had an older teacher who I'm sure when this teacher first started out, she was, yes, I'm going to change the world. Because I believe most teachers that go into that profession, that's what they want to do for these kids. So this teacher had been teaching for 40 years or something. And she was picking on my daughter in front of students. And it's been a big thing now. And there's all this stuff happening. But she was talking to my daughter and she's like, oh, really, Meg? She's like, you're going to eat in class? And my daughter was like, did she really do that to me? She's been teaching a long time. And so my daughter, another kid said, we're going to report you. You should not have done that to her. And she goes, I have tenure. You can't do that. And it caused a big uproar and blah, blah, blah. But the point is, I do think at some point, people who are teaching have always taught, and having a break from it to go off and do, some writing somewhere and then coming back into it to remind you of why you love teaching in the first place, I think is a good idea. And for me, I am at this age, I've been teaching this program to teenagers through this program called Love for Life. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do it full time. I'm going to go to our local high school and say, I'm going to teach a class. Here's the program. Here's whatever. I have sat in 10 meetings and everyone says, well, you have to become accredited. It's like, wait, I have my MBA. I've got all grad degree. I got certificate in this. I know this subject. I've been teaching it for 10 years, privately getting paid. Well, we don't work like that. You have to get a certificate. Then you have to do this. And then you have to do this. And I'm like, it's better for me to go out there and teach it privately and make more money. And I was going to give up time of my life to teach at school, but that's not allowed. Okay. So maybe it's better to keep your money and do it on your own. But it is complicated. But if you can figure it out, I do think homeschooling is pretty cool. Because then you can go on adventures during the day to,
This is very important right now. So I love the idea of adventure. Obviously, that wears off after a few months, maybe in a year or two. But still in all, you can keep it alive. So there is another shift that's happening out there, and it's called a pod. I don't know what POD stands for particularly. I'll have to make a great acronym for it. But a POD is it's happening amongst mostly younger people in their mid to late 20s, because that's who's having kids these days, and only one, maybe two max. But the point is that several families are getting together, 3, 4, 5, 6, usually it's under 10, and doing, like you said, going to say home to home, week to week, month to month, and bringing in tutors, bringing in people. And it tends to be among people who can certainly afford these kinds of things. But it's that function of the little school, what is that, the little prairie house? Little school on the prairie, yeah.
Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah, that's it, the little house on the prairie, the one-room schoolhouse, all kinds of things. And the idea of integrating into your life, first of all, your peers, let's say other parents, and your kids. And so it becomes an interesting environment, and it's apparently is a bit of a movement. So that's really nice, because people are as concerned about the information as they are about the transformation. That's how I say it. And the transformation has to do with values, with mindset, with understanding that there is something about physical health, mental well-being, hello, the tragedy just happened, and spiritual well-being. And unless and until you can align the physical, the mental, and the spiritual, we're not going to produce the kind of adults, let alone children, that we want to be leaders in this remarkably turbulent and changing world. I got to tell you, we got a lot of comments up on the board, and people like it. They think it's informative, it's good, it's interesting. Okay. Time is of the essence right now. So first of all, I'm going to say a huge thank you again to you, wonderful Diane, and Maura and Lori, for being here and giving of your time. And because we don't pay you, this is all pro bono, and you're doing it because you love and you want to share with people. We're going to continue, with your permission, next month again, in the same genre of kids, because kids are the future as well as the present, and marriage is that incubating system that really is the mechanism that allows these young skulls full of mush, as Rush Limbaugh used to say, to actually evolve and become human. And it's not simple. I mean, we all know people in their several decades that's happening too, right? Just because you get to a particular chronological age doesn't mean, oh, I be adult now. No. So again, with everybody's permission, let's do our group hug. We'll tell everybody what HUG stands for again. Heartfelt, unlimited giving. Do a group hug and a little blessing. And God willing, we'll see everybody next month with better news for the country and better news for everybody. But use the information that was given over today by these remarkable, insightful beings. Wonderful Dr. Diane Medved and fabulous Maura Sweeney and wonderful Lori McDermott, and your host, your moderator, Barry Shaw, the ambassador of joy. So on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. I like that, kids. Go forth, live exuberantly, with the seeds of joy, happiness, peace, and love. Bye now. Go mad. Make a difference. Happy Memorial Day. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.